Okay, so we are in Exodus, and I argued 3 years ago that Leviticus was a blueprint for holiness, and Exodus, in this study, is a blueprint for freedom. And so both Exodus and Leviticus appear all throughout, it's just interwoven all throughout the New Testament. In fact, we're going to see today one of the passages that actually appears in Revelation. It's woven all throughout there. And so Exodus is the story of leading Israel out of Egypt, out of slavery, and that becomes the paradigm in the New Testament for freedom. In fact, when Jesus is meeting on the Mount of Transfiguration, they're having a conversation. What they're talking about, it's pretty clear in Greek, is that they're talking about his exodus, the true exodus, which leads us out of slavery to sin, to freedom. You see, slavery always entraps you. It always binds you. Talk to a drug addict. First couple times you do it, it's kind of fun. I've been there. But it doesn't take very long. And when you're addicted, now you're trapped. Talk to an alcoholic, same thing. You become trapped. And so sin always leads you down dark alleys. It's enjoyable in the beginning, but in the long run, it's a dead end. Or as the scripture says, sweet in the mouth and sour in the stomach. And so I've talked to many people over the years, for example, that have gotten into an affair. It's fun in the beginning, but then it doesn't take very long and they're in trouble. And so that's what happens with sin. So freedom is just the opposite. When we walk with the Lord, we open the doors wide open to freedom. And we're going to see that today. We finished with, before Lent, with the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20. That's where we stopped. And I raised the question there, people ask me all the time, are these commandments, are they for every society? And the absolute answer is yes. I asked you, imagine a country without these things in place. Don't steal, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't give false testimony, don't covet your neighbor's house. I mean, any nation that just follows these 10 basic rules begins to establish something that is worthwhile and involves, honestly, freedom and joy. Because we're created for this. So every time we talk about what God is doing, we're going to see it again today, we're also going to ask the question, what do we learn about ourselves by looking at God? Because when he reveals himself to us, he reveals to us who we are. So during Lent, we paused and we looked at in detail at Exodus 3, where Moses asked that really intriguing question, what's your name? And God says, I am. I am what? Well, the rest of the Bible is unfolding that and answering that question. I am everything that you need. So Hebrews says that no one can come to God unless he believes by faith that he is. He is everything that you need. So we looked at Jesus' 7 I am statements in John, which begins to flesh out, I am what? The bread of life. I am the light of the world, on and on and on, things like that. So now we're going to jump back into Exodus. So I need to kind of bring you back up to speed. So these 10 commandments, I argued before Lent that they are for everybody, but it's a little fascinating thing happening chapter before and the chapter after, which is worth reading. I kind of chuckle with it. In Exodus 19, verse 16, now remember, they have not yet met the Lord. Remember that? They're just sitting at the base of Mount Sinai. They saw the 10 plagues. They've seen his miracles. I asked the question before we get to this place in chapters 14, 15 in there. He could have taken them from Egypt and gone right up the Mediterranean coast road and been to the promised land in 10 or 11 days, but he didn't do that. He went way down into southeast, into the Sinai Peninsula, and then further into the desert. And we know from Numbers and Deuteronomy that was a horrible place, filled with scorpions, wild animals, snakes, all kinds of, places. It was a very hostile place. Why did he do that? Well, he's beginning to teach them about himself. Remember, they're just slaves. They just came out of Egypt, and they don't know hardly anything. And they've seen his power, but they haven't met him yet. So he has to begin reshaping their identity. They have to learn to trust him before they can get into the promised land, because they have a lot of dirty work to do in the promised land. And he's protecting them so that they don't automatically start adopting the religious practices of Canaan. I mean, they swapped out Egypt for Canaan. Okay, well, that's not going to help them any. So he takes them down to the desert to begin to reshape their identity and teach them things. So he takes them to places, for example, where there's no water. And what do? They grumble. Okay, how many of you like grumbling or complaining? Come on, let me see. I see two of you, didn't raise your hand, liars. It's natural for us when things don't go well, isn't it, to grumble and complain. I'm right there with you. Okay? And so then all of a sudden they get to a place where there's no food. Really? We remember the leeks and the cucumbers in Egypt. You brought us out here to die. There's not enough graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the desert. And so what God is doing is putting them in situations where they have to turn to Him. Do you see any connection with your life today? That's the beginning of understanding why affliction, suffering is necessary in a broken, fallen world. Why would you be motivated to turn back to God? And it starts right there in those chapters. And so we begin to see very clearly, and it's all the way through, we're not in Numbers, although several of you have asked me, are we going to study Numbers? We might at one point. And is Numbers as interesting as, well, as Exodus? Well, it's got a lot of numbers in it. Okay, it does. But there's a whole lot of theology woven through there. The story is very consistent. And so he's going to do the same thing in Numbers. He's going to teach them things. And so when God is in your life in a way that's not very comfortable, He's teaching you something. He's doing it on purpose. This is not by accident. Okay? And so now they're at the base of Mount Sinai, and God decides to meet them. So Moses says, tell the people, get ready. On the third day, I'm going to introduce myself to them. And here's what happens. Verse 16, on the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. I love this passage. Everyone, okay, you're going to introduce your God and you get to introduce yourself to your new people. Is this how you would do it? Everyone in the camp trembled. They're shaking with fear. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain began to tremble violently. This is a major earthquake. At the sound of the trumpet, it grew louder and louder and louder. Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. Is that how you would introduce yourself? Terrifying your people? Okay. He goes up on the mountain, gets the 10 Commandments. Okay. Then after he gets the 10 Commandments, he comes back down in chapter 20, verse 18. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a great distance. So they walk up to the edge of the mountain, and Moses put a boundary. Don't cross over this. And then he goes up after God introduces himself. He comes back. They're on the other side of the valley. They ran away. That's what you would do. I mean, the good thing about having all these gods, these false gods, is that they don't really ever do anything. Well, we now know they aren't doing anything because they're not real. But they're not doing very much. They're pretty passive. They stay out of our business. But this God doesn't do that. He's right smack in the middle of their business. And on the other side, so I picture Moses trotting across the valley. Wait, everybody, wait a minute. So this is what Moses says. No, this is what they say to Moses. Speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. With this verse, Moses just he moved from being a leader to being a mediator. He's now an intermediary. So there's a lot of things that God is doing here, okay? He's introducing himself to them in a way that they're not going to forget. But he's also raising Moses' stock because they've grumbled against Moses every step of the way. And all of a sudden now they trust Moses because they're terrified of God. And then Moses sends something to them that we need to remember. This starts a whole journey through the rest of scriptures, and we hear this over and over and over again. Moses said to the people, verse 20, do not be afraid. Are you out of your mind? He just terrified us. Do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. okay? This is one of the very earliest places where we begin to get the concept of what it means by the fear of God. Can you imagine Moses standing there and he's pointing to the mountain? He says, you saw that mountain shaking and everything? This is your God. It's not like the gods of Egypt. They did nothing. This is our God. The modern day version would be, our God is bigger than your God, stronger than your God. Can you see them standing there listening to Moses and kind of turning to the mountain and saying, wow, this is our God. He defeated all the gods of Egypt. And this is where the idea of the fear of the Lord begins to capture this concept of reverential awe. When they begin to really understand who God is. Wow, this is our God. So that's kind of the background to this, okay? So you got to remember the covenant that he laid out for them in chapter 19. If you obey me fully, then out of all the people on the earth, you will be my prized possession. I'll make you a holy nation. Why? So that the rest of the nations will come. When they see the way I protect you, I lead you, I care for you, I bless you, then the other nations will come. And that sets the stage for Solomon, 1 Kings 8, at the dedication of the temple. When the foreigner comes, because they have heard of your great name, for they will indeed hear of it, then answer their prayer and bless them, so that they will know that you are the true God. And so he says later on in Deuteronomy, I didn't choose you because you were the biggest nation. No, it's the opposite. You were the smallest nation. You weren't the most powerful. You didn't have a military. You didn't have any of that. I chose you so that you would reach the rest of the nations. That's what he promised Abraham in Genesis 12 and 15. I'm going to bless the whole world through you. So God chose this little group of slaves to turn the world around and to change it. To change the world. And it was a real simple covenant. And their answer in Exodus 19 was all that God has said we will do. They don't know what he wants yet. That's how excited they are. So then in chapter 20, we have the 10 Commandments. Okay. Then in chapter 21, he starts this three chapters where he starts talking about a variety of topics. What he's beginning to do is take these 10 commandments and he's expanding them, and now he's giving them examples. How do you actually live this out? How does that happen? And you know what these explanations do? They begin to reshape world history. Remember, up until this time, when a king put a covenant in place, it wasn't really an option for you. Okay, you're there by conquest. His military was stronger than yours, and you're now his subjects, or most likely his slaves. So here's a covenant I'm going to make with you. You obey me, and I'll make sure I feed you. If you don't, I'll kill you. So God's laying out a whole different platform here. And so as he begins to explain these 10 commandments, he's describing a culture that is just absolutely fabulous. I'm not going to read through all of them. There's a lot. I'll just go down through the list, but there's one group I want to look at. He talks about fellow servants in Exodus 21. You know, the purpose of the law, when we get into the middle of Leviticus, is that there would be no poor among you. He says that. He says it again in Deuteronomy. There will be no poor among you. When Jesus quotes the second commandment, love the Lord, love one another as yourselves, that came right out of the smack in the middle of Leviticus. That's the whole reason for the law, is that we love one another and take care of one another. Okay, this is world history changing here, right in front of our eyes, folks. We're talking about a movement that the world had never seen. He starts to introduce dignity. So he starts talking about fellow servants, your fellow Israelites, and how to treat them. He moves from there into personal injuries, how we care for each other. He moves from there to protection of personal property, social responsibility. Chapter 23, he moves into an area dealing with justice and mercy. Okay, so he's explaining this is the heart of the law and what God really intended with these 10 commandments. So from here on out, the rest of Exodus, all of Leviticus, and the first 10 chapters of Numbers are all dealing with how to live out these 10 commandments. Okay, here's what he says. Do not spread, this is chapter 23, do not spread false reports. Do not help a guilty person by being a malicious witness. You know what he's doing? He's starting to introduce this concept of dignity, which no other nation understood or had developed this concept. People are important. He moves from there. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. And do not show favoritism to a poor person in a lawsuit. That's kind of a surprise. In other words, everybody has dignity. We treat everybody the same, wherever you are. He's not distinguishing between the poor and the rich. If you come across your enemies, whoa. Let's read that again. If you come across your what? Who? Who's he talking about? If you come across your best friend's ox, is that what it says? No, what does it say? If you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to return it. He's beginning to move the world away from vengeance, which was prevalent in every society. He's going to say a little bit later, vengeance is mine, not yours. I get to decide what to do. You do not. This is called dignity. Treating your enemy with respect. And that's not enough. If you see the donkey of someone you love, if you see the donkey of someone you hate, fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure you help them with it. Do you realize how countercultural this is? It's very countercultural in today's world. Just look in any social media or mainstream media, newspaper, and gosh. But in the ancient world, vengeance ruled the day, and he's eliminating that. Do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. Probably all have opinions on who's getting away with things and who's not. Typically, they have money and power if they're getting away with it. Do not deny justice to the poor people. The poor people. This is relevant today. We ought to read this to all of our congressmen. Have nothing to do with a false charge. Do not put an innocent or honest person to death, for I will not acquit the guilty. You put an honest person to death, you just assume their responsibility. This is integrity he's talking about. Something the world had not seen. It's brand new. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds those who see and twist the words of the innocent. This is normal. Still normal in a good part of the world. Do not oppress a foreigner. Do not oppress a foreigner. Okay, I rarely get into politics. I'm going to stay out of politics, but I'm going to tell you my theology. I never, ever want to be part of a country that doesn't accept immigrants. Let me be clear, just in case you didn't understand me. I never want to be part of a country that does not accept foreigners or immigrants, ever. You know what cost Israel their whole nation? Stay out. They even hung signs on the temple. Gentiles, beware of death if you cross this threshold. 10 tribes disappeared, the northern kingdom completely. Never came back. Now, having said that, let me qualify it. That doesn't mean we swing the door the other way and just open it for anybody. We're already feeling the stress as a nation of what that's costing us. What it looks like to solve this problem is not a yes or no. And that's how we've divided this nation right down the middle. Should we do it or should we not do it? That's the wrong question. The whole reason we are blessed is so we can accept people. When God gets into Deuteronomy, the last words of Moses, he says, don't you think for a second that you're rich because of your own hard work or your intelligence. You're only rich because God decided to make you rich. Don't you think for a second that when you move into the houses which are already built, that's because you're good? Don't you think for a second that? It's only because God wants to use you to bless the nations. Don't you think for a second when you inherited crops from the people that are going to be displaced, that are growing, or the animals that are all there. Don't think for a second it's because of you. It's not. This is a central tenet in our theology. God blesses us so that we can be a blessing to others. You own nothing. We are stewards. We are not owners. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And if you can handle it, God will bless you with it. And you get two choices. It's mine. I'm going to keep it. That's called greed. Or you can say, look what the Lord has blessed me with. Can I give some to you? How about to you? How about to you? And you give it away. That's called generosity. This is the heartbeat of theology all the way through the scriptures. Read the passages in James on how difficult it is for the rich people to get into heaven. Read it. And it all starts right here in this, as God begins to explain. This is countercultural to every nation on the face of the earth. Every one. I don't know how to solve the problem. I'm not that wise. But I believe that if we were to get together, cross the aisle, and start conversations of how to do this wisely, and if we could get some people to say, how do we do it in a way that exalts the Lord and honors Him, we would solve this problem. It is solvable. The Bible talks about it abundantly, how to solve these problems. Even the New Testament, every epistle in the New Testament goes to a different ethnic group. Do you realize that? The New Testament itself is a model of managing reconciliation in ethnically diverse contexts. Corinthians are written to Greeks. Okay, Titus is written to a Mediterranean island culture, Crete. Romans is written to Italians. Churches in Asia Minor, Turkish people. James, Jewish Christians. So the Bible gives us all the answers we need. If we can talk people into, settle down and let's have a conversation. We can figure out what this looks like. But the whole reason behind it starts right here. To be a blessing to the world, not to ourselves. Do not oppress a foreigner. You yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners because you were foreigners in Egypt. A couple generations after that, they forgot all about it. And I'm guessing most of you are second, third, fourth, fifth generation Americans, and you don't know what it's like to be oppressed. We're in the same risky situation they're in right here. 10 of the 12 tribes are gone forever. I don't want to be in that role. So this is fleshing out what it means, okay? Okay, the whole reason God did this, let me go back to Exodus 19 and remind you, because he's explaining it to Moses. This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, what you are to say, tell the people of Israel. Exodus 19, 3 and 4. You yourselves know, you have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. This is the whole reason behind the Exodus. Freedom is about bringing people closer to the Lord. Satan, spiritual warfare, is about putting them in prison. That's the whole reason behind it. So, Moses is going to ratify the covenant. They've already said once all that God has said we will do. So now here's how he does it. This is a standard process in this part of the world, okay, on how to ratify a covenant with a couple of very significant unexpected changes. Okay, the first thing he does is he's explained it to them. He secures their verbal agreement. Exodus 24, verse 3. Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, and they responded with one voice, everything the Lord has said, we will do. There it is. Number 2. Said it a second time. Now they've heard it. Okay, So they said it the first time just because they're thrilled about how God has cared for them. Now they say it a second time because they've heard the commandments. But Moses does something very interesting here in Exodus, the very next verse, verse 4. Then Moses wrote down everything the Lord said. Okay, covenant had to be in writing. The moment you put it in writing, it's like a contract today. It becomes pretty important. Okay, what happens, the ramifications and all that become very important. So he wrote it down. He got up early the next morning, built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, that's a pause. That's not the way they did it back then. Because when they put the covenant in place, they called on all the gods to be witnesses. Well, there aren't gods. There's only one God. So, remember in Genesis 15, God has Moses take animals, kill them, cut them, put all the halves. And what would happen in the ancient world, two people would go arm in arm down between all the dead animals. And when they get to the end, they said, this is what will happen to us if I don't obey my side of the covenant or contract. Okay? That's important to remember. Then they will call on the gods as witnesses. So he sets up, rather than calling on the gods, he sets up an altar. So he's going to call on the one true God as a witness. But then he sets up these 12 pillars. These are historical markers to always remind them that they made a covenant with God as a nation. This is a departure from what we usually see. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Remember the fellowship offering in Leviticus 3 and 7? That's where they celebrated what God has done with thanksgiving. Moses took half the blood and put it in the bowls, and the other half he splashed against the altar. So he killed these bulls and splashes the blood on the altar. So there's been a blood sacrifice. An animal has paid this price for this covenant. Then he stuns them. Okay? Verse 8. Moses then took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. No ancient ceremony has this. What do you think they thought when droplets of blood from a bull is running down their face? Onto their clothes. This is new. They've said twice all that the Lord has said we will do. What do you think they're thinking? What did we just commit to? What did we get ourselves into? See, that blood is a good reminder. That's what happens to you if you don't keep the commandment. You die. He sprinkles the blood on the people and he says, this blood is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all of these words. That's the blood of the covenant. In other words, we're talking serious business. Next week, we're going to look at this story. 5 weeks later, they fail and sin. And God decides to violate the covenant himself. We'll take a look at it. I'm not going to read to you what happens. I'm not going to show it up here, but after this, they had just said everything the Lord had said we will do. We will obey. And so Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, 70 elders, they all go up in the mountain. And it says they saw the God of Israel. The closest they can come to describing it is they say under his feet was something like a pavement of lapis lazuli. Okay? As bright as the blue of the sky. And God did not raise his hand against them because they entered into the covenant. And he says, have a seat. Let's eat. This is a precursor all the way to the end of the story. By the way, this is the same description in Revelation. When they see God, they see this pavement. It's incredible. And at the end of the story, he has the wedding supper of the Lamb, the wedding feast for his bride. That's us. And so once the covenant is made in the ancient world, then you sit and you enjoy fellowship together. So God brought the leaders up, the representative of the nation, and said, let's dine together. And they saw God. This is the beginning of the rest of our belief. This is the beginning of it. The covenant has been ratified. It only took them 5 weeks. We'll see that next week. How do the Ten Commandments, or do they relate to us? Yes, they do. What do you think a world would look like if we followed these commands? What do you think? Do not steal. Don't commit adultery. Don't covet other people's stuff. Trust the Lord. Take care of the poor, the marginalized. Take care of them, the widows, the orphans. Take care of them. What would the world look like? If your enemy's ox falls, go and help pick it up. If it gets loose, go give it back to your enemy. What would this world look like? It would be a world that the world has never seen, wouldn't it? And that's why we exist as a church. The harsher it gets out there, the more we shine if we live by faith. The harder it gets and the more distraction and fracture there is out there, then the greater the opportunity for us to reflect something the world has never seen. Goodness. Don't be afraid of what's happening. Don't place your faith in the wrong place. Go vote your conscience, but don't worry about which president gets there. Don't do that. If we live like that, more than I've ever been here, in my time in 11 years, we have more of a chance to show our county what it really looks like. To be servants, followers of the one true living God, because they don't know what it's like. They don't know. Father, thank you for giving us this incredible opportunity. But Lord, as we have prayed so many times and will continue to pray, we are so thankful for you. We are so grateful, Lord, for your kindness, your goodness, for your gentleness, for your willingness to step in, bind yourself to us and love us, for your desire to see us reach this tired, broken world for you. Lord, help us as a church to be the kind of people that you're describing in this covenant, so that the world will look and take notice. In Jesus' name, amen.